And if you haven't seen the past dozen or so videos, you are not going to understand those connections. So go back. Okay. So I would say, write shit down, go back. This is why the desert confrontation fits this whole pattern. He's carrying the breadth of the ritual enforcement laid out in earlier text. He's entering this liminal zone, this gateway. He encounters a being that speaks in enforcement language, and it mirrors the Exodus Psalm 78 destroyer angel pattern. He's not just enforcing the law. He's continuing the priestly ritual of suppressing Ephraim. Wait a minute. Are you saying that the first century temple system was set up with this ritual structure? You're telling me that Babylon and Persia were engaged in ritual occult while running the entire priesthood system in the first century that Jesus fought against? Yes.
You know, Keith, there's in England kind of an underground top 10 about people that are expected to die soon.
Am I on the list?
Yeah, you're taking the number 1 position in that.
Great,
How
okay,
about
I'll let you know.
But how about this?
It's a bit morbid, and I don't think you should answer
I've
that.
had rumours like that for years.
You think it's rubbish? You think
Well,
it's rubbish?
I would never get out
Well,
there
you
and
never
say
know when your
it's
number's
rubbish,
up.
You know, I might walk out of here and get run over.
Lou Reed is on the 2nd place. He's very proud of
No, I
it.
think he can beat me, actually.
Hi, and welcome to our Bible study channel.
Energy. 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 You cannot fuck with this. Energy. You cannot fuck with this energy. Love to do those in the flesh. All of those who are listening, don't miss the message, judging me. You cannot fuck with this energy. Energy.
These are videos that go pretty in depth. First thing you should probably do is pause and read our 12 rules for reading biblical text. And if you don't like the 12 rules or you don't understand the 12 rules, well, I don't have time to explain them all. Go back to the book that I wrote and uploaded on this channel, which takes you through the entire arc and how we made these quote unquote 12 rules as a framework of what we found after 7 years digging meticulously and carefully through the text. So if you're confused, go do that. If I refer back, well, that's probably because we actually post these things in order. So they're all done in series. And if you jump in at the middle of a series without any schema or background knowledge, and you get all pissed off, well, that's also not our problem. This is a group where we go line by line, scroll by scroll through the text. Warning, we are not language sensitive, so if you can't handle some cussing, it's not the place for you. We also do not endorse nor approve of pretty much any mainstream theology. So if you're looking for that, also definitely not the place for you. We do a video about the characters that we use in our Bible study series. And the reason we do this is sort of so that they can kind of get in your head. So we do have a video explaining why we chose the people we chose and how their sort of energy characteristics go along with the biblical characters to modernize it for people so they know what the heck we're reading. Clearly, the Roman Church was not doing their job and looking for the lost sheep of the reunited House of David. So that's what we're doing, okay? We're taking that away from them because they screwed it up. The brilliant rabbis also down there in Babylon are also not looking for the lost sheep of the reunited kingdom of David. So you're not going to hear, let's follow Rome. And you're not going to hear, let's follow the rabbis on this channel. Because, sorry, not sorry, but the Bible wasn't actually written for the corrupt Levitical priesthood post-Babylon and Persia to read it through their little janky books. And it also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of pagan 4th century church fathers. So we're not doing that either. You guys can both have a seat. Oddly enough, the Bible also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of some dumbass scholars with pieces of paper that say they're smarter than everyone, but have never seen a Davidic covenant in their life. Not written for them either. You know who it's written for? It's written for the reunited house of David, who are actually in covenant and are actually the sheep. That's who it's written for. That's why nobody else can understand what the heck's going on. What you are going to hear is what you're supposed to hear, which is, let's follow the king. And let's get started.
So, we are going to war.
And welcome back. Welcome back. We are doing Paul's Paganism, episode 3. And we're going to talk about this light in the desert and finish up our first paragraph in Acts 9 today. So let's get rolling. It's a long one. Again, it's a doozy. All right, so we're talking about the whole goal of this series is to study Paul's pagan references and why they matter. And we started in Acts 9 with the light in the desert incident. And we got some character understanding. We got some setting understanding. So let's check out the rest of our agenda today. We're going to do some vocab. We're going to do a little bit of review of Baal-Hadad's 3 attributes. We're going to talk about what an epiphany genre is. We're going to go ahead and read Acts 9, 1 through 5 again. Talk about some of the words in there. We're going to take a look at some Greek ritual texts. And, we're going to meet Resheph. Okay, hold on to your hats. And we're probably going to have a lot of put a pin in that episode. So get your notebook, a little put a pin in that moment. So get your notebooks ready. I want to remind that we are reading this through the lens that Acts is a legal document, not a theological memoir. Okay. This is a defense brief, a legal narrative, right? This is where James commissioned Luke to say, go ahead and write Luke because this is what we are. And then go ahead and write Acts. This is something else. Okay, remember, if you don't know what I'm talking about, all the way back to the intro for the Luke series. Okay, all these series mixed together. You got to kind of go in order. Then what you're going to see is the different versions of Paul's encounter. These aren't theological embellishments or anything like that. They're legal depositions, and they're tailored for 3 different audiences, right, among the Roman judicial chain. So it's showing how Paul talks to different audiences in different ways, and that makes sense of his 3 different stories. We're not there yet. Just pointing that out. Okay, this is where, why would James have to do a legal brief? Well, because when Paul pissed everybody off by defiling the temple, Nero has the question of, why are the Jews angry at the Christians if the Christians are Jews? Because Jews had that legal umbrella covering under the law. So Nero now has to say, well, wait a minute, are these Christians Jews and protected under Jewish law? Or is this a new cult, which would be illegal? So Luke's answer on James' behalf is, no, we're Jews. Don't persecute us. Nothing to see here. Paul is not. So this isn't a theology. This is legal survival. And that's how we've been reading it. And if you want more on that, like I said, back to the Luke series. So James is saying to Nero, we fall under the Jewish umbrella. We're legal. We're peaceful. We pay our taxes. We follow Moses. We're not a new cult. We're not a threat. And we're not Paul. So they're making a distinction here between the two groups. So liminal space. What is liminal space? Well, simply put, that's a gateway or a crossing. And this could be physical or this could be metaphysical. So you're crossing over the river like Abraham, right? Or you're crossing from one kingdom to the next. Or you're crossing into the temple under the Baal arch. Could be that. Okay, it's any kind of crossing over. It could be crossing from one realm to the other realm. Okay. In personal experience, if you guys have followed my story, liminal space would be the sleep paralysis that hits right before I'm taken, or even better, the whoop sucking out part, right? Where I'm sucked out of my body into a different space. That sucking out part, that passing over part would be the liminal space. You're on your way to somewhere else. Now, when we say astral, the best way to define this in the woo-woo, this is more of a modern term, sort of from New Agey, but just think of it as a space of non-material data forms, okay, or non-material grids. Okay, so astral is actually a place, while liminal space is the crossing into a different place. Astral is actually the place. And the ether is sort of this atmosphere or data grid that's holding everything together like glue. Okay, so that's kind of the difference in the words. So what liminal space means in ancient studies, in A&E, ancient Near East, it's this threshold, a boundary, a place between two realms. You're not here and you're not there. It's a way station or a crossing point, if you will. So ether, astral, and dimensional, which you hear all of these words thrown around today, are different than liminal, okay? They're metaphors for this non-physical space, altered states, alter realms, either symbolic or real, imagined or conceptual, different layers of reality, different layers of the heavens, if you will, the way it's used. And so they kind of mean not here, but not gone, but it's you're somewhere. Then we have what we call an epiphany genre. And we really want to lay out what this genre is. The core features of an epiphany type of writing is that there's a sudden appearance or manifestation of something divine or supernatural. You've got a moment of heightened perception or insight where this character in this narrative would suddenly understand something profound about themselves or the world. It's culturally mediated, which means even when this divine appears, the whole experience is shaped by some kind of ritual, symbolism, or whatever expectations are within that culture that's producing that literature, narrative, or piece of material in this genre. So it's definitely has a cultural piece, and you have to pay attention to that. Epiphanies blur the line between divine presence and psychological experience. So there's something, quote unquote, supernatural or unexplained going on here. And boy, oh boy, was the ancient world chock full of epiphany genres. So in style, you've got vivid sensory details, you've got emotional intensity, a shift in the tone, and it's framed as a revelation. You'd have religious epiphanies where the gods are appearing to humans, and they're doing this in poetry, ritual, or myth, and it's ambiguous or partial concealment of the gods. You've got this in Hellenistic political epiphanies, where rulers are depicted as receiving these divine appearances to legitimize their authority. So this is also used as a text to legitimize. Remember, we always talk about the divine monarchy. Okay, well, I saw God. Think of Constantine and his vision in the Roman. He saw a vision, and that's why we're doing all this. When he went to battle with the bridge and all that stuff, that's epiphany literature. Okay, and this was rampant. This type of story, this type of pattern was rampant in the ancient world. Okay, it's not just Greek, but in the Greek tradition, probably the most familiar is Dionysus, but there's others. Okay, and this is your Bacchic epiphany, where Dionysus is famous for this dramatic, overwhelming epiphanies, and they're in altered or overwhelming form. The Epiphany of Dionysus, okay, it depicts this sudden divine appearance, and it echoes scenes from the Bacchae. Okay, so this is very common, and Dionysus is just one of them. All right, we also, though, interestingly, have political epiphanies, I mentioned in the Greek. So this is what was used to legitimize rulers. Okay? I saw God and God said so. Moses said so. Okay? They're back to that again. And they blur this divine presence, political propaganda, and ritual symbolism all together in order to legitimize their rulership or their military, sometimes even. But it's not just in ancient Greek. It's also in Egypt, Ugarit, and Phoenicia. So in Egypt, we've got this divine manifestation patterns. Okay. I tell you guys, all roads lead to Egypt. And deities like the Amun, Re, Isis, Osiris, Horus, basically all of them, both, they were all believed to manifest through their statues, their idols, these ritual processions, banquets, that eating meat to idol thing, incense, light, and priestly embodiment. They would embody the priests themselves. So we've got a lot of the same ritual architecture that we've been talking about this whole time. Also, in Egypt, we see that it's sort of a solar epiphany. The rising sun was the daily epiphany, this visible manifestation of divine presence. We talked about that in the Meet Baal series, going to the underworld and coming back up each day. And they had festivals of epiphanies, and these were the goddess's statue or idol was carried straight out of the temple in this procession, symbolizing the appearance to the people. We've also got Baal-Hadad himself. He's got epiphany patterns, and this is your storming piece, okay? His presence is revealed through thunder, lightning, clouds, storms, rain after drought. All of these things are happening to reveal the God to the people. We've also got victories. So like, because Baal-Hadad's a warrior deity, right? His appearance is the breaking of drought, the return of fertility, the defeat of chaos forces in war. We've also got temple presence. And this is using incense, ritual, processions as signs of divine presence. So they're doing all of this same ritual stuff, same literal language. In Phoenicia, we share Baal. I'm telling you, he's got a big stronghold over there. Got a big stronghold. We have a Baal Shaman, which is a Baal of the heavens. And this is also storms, lightning, celestial signs, same stuff. In Tyre, okay, it's not exactly, you're not going to find this if you look it up, but it's part of the same Baal type tradition. And these are focused on fire, seasonal renewal, and this ritual resurrection that we're going to talk about a little more today. We touched on before. And it comes through cult objects again, of course, sacred poles, altars, incenses, and processions, or the appearance or the revealing of these idols. So let's do a quick review about our friend Baal-Hadad. Because we said before, he's just not a rival storm god to Jesus's father. He is the ritual gatekeeper of transpossession, fertility cults, and seasonal resurrection. We talked about that. His worship saturated the whole region of Aram, creating an infrastructure that mimicked divine override. Okay, and that's where we're placing Saul of Tarsus's Damascus Road experience. So what do I mean when I say he was the gatekeeper of trance and ecstatic ritual? Well, there aren't any texts that explicitly use the word trance, but they show the elements of the ancient Near East and that scholars associate with possession or ritual. So a storm epiphany, an overwhelming presence, He's described as a storm god who appears in lightning, thunder, and overwhelming force, a deity whose manifestations were sudden, overpowering, and fear-inducing. Put a pin in that. Put a pin in that one when we read the text. These are usually most associated with prophetic frenzy, trance-like ritual behavior, ecstatic states, because their arrival is such a sensory overload, okay, that they interpreted as divine presence. Fertility cults use this ecstatic ritual in their practices and ceremonies, and they were always tied to these seasonal agricultural rotations. So they included ecstatic dancing, trances, intoxication, possession-like behavior, and the fertility cult context with the storm epiphany imply that they were in this trance state or ecstatic dimension. So the fertility god itself, the fertility god piece, is actually really, really explicit in any of the sources when it comes to our friend Hadad. So you're going to directly see this in the text. Just explicitly, it's a fertility god, okay? And there's some examples for you. So it lists it as one of its attributes. Very explicitly right in the text that you will find talking about them. So why fertility? Well, he controlled all of that stuff about agricultural abundance at the time. And what you have to understand is that I've said this before and I'm going to say it again. If you didn't have fertility cycles, rain, you have drought. Drought is famine. Famine is disease. It's death, starvation. This was a life or death situation, which is why everybody had a storm god, okay, associating the coming of the crops and the fertility of the land. And if you didn't have that, it's not like, oh, well, the farmers had a bad year. It's like, no, populations are wiped out. So it's really important to have a strong fertility or storm god. All right, so these rituals to this god were sexual symbolism, planting and harvest, of course, the reproduction and the strength of your livestock, all of that stuff that comes with this prosperity of the region. Now, these fertility cult practices in the Bible were all about promoting agriculture and procreation and fertility of the livestock. Okay? This is exactly what Hadad's domain is. Then we've got that seasonal resurrection, also explicit in the text, the Baal cycle. So he's got this death and resurrection cycle. And it talks about how he has to have this battle with Mot. And it's not a one-time deal, okay? And Mot is death. And he goes and descends into the underworld. Okay, we've talked about this in our Meat Baal series. And the land becomes dry and barren, which is akin to death of the population, right? And then we have an intervention. And then we have Baal's return and resurrection and the restoration of happiness and prosperity on the earth. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to read Acts 9. And we're just going to start here. When you strip away all the institutions, theological papering over or smoothing over of this scene, what we're going to find today is that the logic of the argument that Christian preachers are putting out there completely collapses. If the speaker in Acts 9 is actually Jesus, son of David, man of Nazareth, the whole logic is going to collapse here. But it becomes coherent again if you imagine the speaker as an entity operating within these boundaries in Aram in the ritual epiphany genre of the ancient Near East. So let's take a look at Acts 9 and share this tab instead. And we're going to stop along the way, and I'm going to kind of fumble through this because I didn't actually write all of these down. We'll hit them again in the slide deck. But as we read through, I'm going to sort of hit these one at a time. Get a notebook, write this down. All right. But Saul, and we're going to stop after, I think, verse 5 for now. But Saul, still breathing threat and murder against the disciples, or sometimes it's threats and slaughter, or threatenings and slaughterings, against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and requested from him letters to Damascus addressed to the synagogues, that if he found any who were of the way, the followers of Jesus, meaning men or women, he should bring them bound to Jerusalem. And as he traveled along, approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven shone around him, and falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, well, who are you, Lord? He said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Okay. And then we rise and we go to the city, and we'll get to that piece next, but like later on. Right now, we've got, this is chock full just here in Acts 9. So some of the things I want to show you, that we'll be kind of discussing in this framework today, okay, is I don't want to do just a full Greek lesson, okay? I want to show you guys what some of these words mean in the ritual language context and within the epiphany genre, okay? Because it doesn't mean what it's been translated to mean. Okay, let's get that clear. So he's breathing, and some translations say breathing out, like that blowing, that breath. Okay, that's actually not what this word means. It doesn't mean breathing out. Yeah, it's like threatening, like he's cursing, he's stomping around like Rumpelstiltskin, yelling and rah, 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 rah. No, it's not an outward breath. You can see that right here. Like, we don't have to go deep, guys. It's to breathe into, upon, to be animated with the spirit of. It actually means to breathe in more than it does breathe out. And this word, guys, to breathe unto, okay? A lot of times they say breathe unto. No. Unto means to, toward. So he's breathing in threats toward the disciples, okay? But he's taking the breath in, and that's very, very important in ritual context. They used to think that when you were breathing in, you were literally breathing in the spirit to animate you. It was just part of their thinking, okay? This isn't cursing out. This is breathing in the spirit. They're talking about the spirit of fear, the spirit of anger. These aren't emotions, okay? It's not saying the emotion of fear and the emotion of anger. It's literally breathing. It's in the air, and you're consuming it through the breath. So that's a big one. So he's consuming this anger and murder against the apostles. And we're going to see about these murder and threat spirit that he's breathing in. So he's breathing in the spirit of murder and the spirit of threat or slaughter. That's the context here. Okay. Breathing in the spirit of slaughter. That's what we're doing. We're not blowing on anybody. And it's not cursing the disciples. It's like in opposition to, right? Or toward, right? They're the ones that are making him angry and breathe in this spirit of anger. So that's what that first piece is. He goes to the high priest. He gets his letters. We talked about all this. He's going to bound them to Jerusalem. And as he's approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven. We're going to talk about this light from heaven business and what this quote unquote light from the heavens means in epiphany language. So put a pin in the light from heaven. But the next word that I really want to show you is this one. He's falling to the ground. People are like, oh, he like tripped and stumbled. That is not this word, okay? So like, oh, he couldn't see and he kind of fell down like before, like to pray or something. No. The connotation of this falling word, okay, is to be prone. Fall down dead. Fall into ruin. This is not a good falling. This is not a temporary slip up. And this is not a get on your knees and pray moment. Okay. Sometimes if you're casting lots, right? You're like, oh, I fell on hard luck. That's what this is. It's to fail, become null and void, fall into a worse state. I mean, guys, this is a ruinous word. It is not a good word. This is not a good word. To fall into sin, to come to ruin, to fall into judgment and condemnation, to fall upon and seize, like violently be seized. Okay. Now, or to fall under the control of something. Now, this one says, upon, like to light upon, but that's in Revelation. And the context here is you will not fall upon hunger. You will not fall upon thirst. So it's still bad. Okay. It's still bad. So this is a bad word. Okay. He fell into ruin to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Now this Saul, Saul language is sort of a courtroom jurisdiction pattern. And we're not going to talk about that too much today, but we always talk about the courtroom, right? In Zion and its courtroom jurisdiction patterns throughout the Bible in this legal language. Well, the repeating of the name is one of those. And we'll probably hit on that another time. But just note that it is here also. We see that in other places through the Bible. And then the question is, why are you persecuting me? Well, sorry, translators. That word's not persecuting. This is the big one, okay? This one, these assholes, this does not mean persecuting here, nor does it mean persecuting down here, okay? That's not what this means. And it doesn't make sense. And we'll talk about why this doesn't make sense if it's Jesus. You're telling me Saul is persecuting Jesus? Guys, Jesus' ass is on the throne. He ain't getting persecuted by anyone. So the question would be, why are you persecuting my followers? Why are you persecuting my disciples? That's not what this says, okay? This says, and he said, who are you, Lord? There's our curios word. And Saul said, I am, or the light said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting? Yes, this makes no logical sense. Unless it's ritual language with a mimicking spirit. Because what does this word actually mean? Well, let's take a look. It's right here. To follow and pursue. That's what it means. It means to chase. Okay? To follow eagerly and earnestly. Now here, to pursue and persecute. Yeah, that's not what that means. That's the secondary definition. The primary definition is, why are you chasing after me? Why are you pursuing me? This makes more sense because he's breathing threats and slaughter in the area of Aram. So it's like this deity, this entity comes and says, why are you chasing after me? The threat and slaughter guy. And we're going to see how that adds up. But just know, put a pin in this word persecuting. And we're going to talk about that one a little more too. So that's the big picture of this, the big ticket items in this ritual language epiphany story that we're seeing. All right, let's go back. And we're going to share this tab instead. So that's a brief overview of some of the language that we'll be getting into a little bit today as we continue to work through this. So we're going to walk through this, and we're going to walk through step by step. If Jesus is enthroned, Paul is not persecuting Jesus. So we can throw that definition out. Although it's like a secondary connotation that can be there sometimes, it doesn't make sense, okay? You're not persecuting Jesus. Jesus is the king. His ass is on the throne, you ain't persecuting him. So that makes no sense. He's ascended, he's enthroned, he's glorified, he's beyond harm. So the line, why are you persecuting me, makes absolutely no sense. Paul is going after humans. He's going after the disciples, the followers, the community, not the enthroned figure. So if the speaker in this scene, the speaker to Saul, was Jesus, he'd say, why are you persecuting my disciples? Not me. Oh, well, he lives in the... No, he's not living in the disciples. That's a Pauline doctrine. That is not a Hebrew doctrine. I'm done with this. Jesus is inside of me. Okay, that's ritual possession language. Get it out of your brain. That's Paul. Okay, that's Paul. You can't argue Paul with Paul. So, and it's not what the Greek says. Greek is a specific language. It's got very specific words with very specific connotations. Okay, it's very precise. That's the beauty of Greek, is the preciseness of the language. Luke's writing style, he is someone who's very, very careful with pronouns, okay, when he's making a theological point. He wants you to know exactly who he's talking about. Here, he's not doing that. The next one is this Greek word makes the problem even worse, because it means, like we talked about, to chase, to run after. Well, Paul isn't running after Jesus enthusiastically, okay? Persecute is this derived meaning. It's not at all the base meaning of the word or the text that we just read. So this persecuting me isn't Jesus, son of David. This isn't Jesus of the Galilee talking. Our next one was this breathing threats and murder. This isn't metaphor, okay? This isn't emotion. It's ritual language. Breath was the animating spirit. Breathing threats is being filled with a hostile entity. Murderous breath is the influence or the possession of this entity, the action of that. Inhaling wrath is taking in the spirit of violence. And where is he? He's in Aram. So Luke is using very specific ritual cult language here. This isn't psychological, emotional BS. This isn't fluffy metaphor that he's using here. Paul isn't just angry. He's animated with the spirit he just breathed in. All right. And then we've got Damascus is Hadad's turf, and we know that matters, right? We know that matters a lot in the biblical narrative. If you don't know why, go back. It's our spiritual vacuum and waffle zone. It was his cult center, this hot spot of epiphany, known for desert appearances. Deserts are also thought of as liminal spaces, gateways from here to there, where all of these epiphanies and encounters would happen. This is one reason why Jesus said, don't listen to the lunatics in the desert getting epiphanies, if you will. His warning in Matthew 24, don't listen to a weirdo in the desert if he says, it's me, it's not me. I'm not coming to anyone in a desert epiphany. It makes more sense now, that specific warning from the king that we see in Matthew 24. It fits right in here because this is just part of the culture. It's known for these desert apparitions. Okay. So all of this, guys, is just a textbook storm god epiphany. This isn't Jesus's language. If you think this is Jesus talking, you don't know him very well. Okay. And we're trying to get to know him better. So pay attention. All right. So this reading, the way we're reading it here, is going to resolve the contradictions. You read it this way, all of these contradictions go away. If the speaker is a desert entity, okay, doing storm god, he's impersonating Jesus. He's a deceiving spirit. This is a being that Paul has been tracking or pursuing through the violence itself that he's been portraying. And we'll talk about how that works also. Because Paul's violence is aligned with the entity's domain. Paul is not opposed to it. So what I'm saying here is if Paul is going into Hadad's territory, okay, and he's against the apostles, well, Hadad's against the apostles as well. Paul's against Jesus. Well, Hadad's against Jesus as well. Paul has just committed a murder with Stephen. Well, Hadad is violence, right? He's aligned through violence. All of these things, when you are aligned emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, with the God in the region you are in, you're in their domain, okay? You are aligned with them. It's a covenant jurisdiction thing, guys. It's a covenant jurisdiction thing. It's an alignment. Not opposed to it. There's no ritual boundaries put up for protection against the entity when you're completely aligned with it. And he's unrepentant about it, by the way. He's breathing its breath, and he's animated by its wrath in this region. But the next question we have to ask is, who is Resheph? And this part can get very difficult for me to talk about. So we're going to do my best. You can see today, I'm not babbling so much. I'm pretty much just clicking through and reading right from the slides. Because of my personal experience, this is like I would need a trigger warning on this if I was like a snowflakey person, right? Trigger warning. So this is a very difficult part for me to get through specifically. So we're going to do the best I can. And we're just going to keep going, okay? Because there's no wussies. There's no wussies in the house of David. So we're going to cover this. But if you're like, why does she sound weird? She's just like running through this. Well, it's because this is a really hard paragraph for me to break down this way. And I'll then tell you a story. I'll tell you a story about this when we finish up today and why this is a really interesting and personal paragraph to me. But who is Resheph? Well, Resheph is an ancient deity. We would think of it as a demon, although that's not necessarily the technical term, okay? It's attested in Ugaritic texts, Phoenician, Aramaic, Egyptian, and Hebrew Bible. He is in there. So we need to talk about who this guy is. All right. This little bastard, this little bastard. Okay. His domains are plague, fever. He's known for carrying these arrows and doing fast, sudden, blitzkrieg sort of attack, okay? He's associated with desert fire. And fire, we've talked about water being chaos. We haven't talked about fire being a boundary, okay? But that's the word we're going to use today. We're not going to go deep. But if water is chaos, I think fire boundary, okay? Think of the flaming sword protecting the garden, okay? It's a boundary zone. It's also judgment, okay? So he's in charge of the desert boundary zone in the judgment within the desert of his domain, of this Baal-Hadad domain. He's also associated with blinding light and violent epiphanies, where you are thrown down to the ground and seized and fall into ruin. That's this guy. He's not a devil figure. And one of the things that Westerners need to overcome in their brain is the number that's been done with thinking that there is one figure at the top in this pyramid hierarchy, and what one entity is at the top. I want you to just to get that out of your brain, because that is not an ancient Middle East thinking or ancient Near East thinking. Okay. You need to think of a cartel of entities. We did this back in the series where we talked about the ritual and how, when I gave that example of being on the floor and working in the grid, and there's all these entities out there and they're working together and switching positions. And that's what it's like. It's like a cartel, not a single figure running an ultimate military. Does that make sense? Everyone's got different roles, and their shared goal is to rebel against Jesus's father. That's what it is. It's not one figure summoning everyone else. Now, there is hierarchical structure within all of these tentacles, but you've got to think of it as tentacles, not a pyramid. It's a cartel, not a dictatorship. And that's a really important switch of the brain, because everyone's like, well, who's the head guy over everybody? Well, what region are you in is the question. Okay. Who is enthroned in that region? They have their minions, but it's not like there's one person over everything. Does that make sense? He's not a devil figure. He's this storm god adjacent, plague bearing, desert manifesting deity. He's sudden, he's blinding, he's overwhelming. He'll disorient you. He's fiery. He's enforcing those boundaries and the judgment within that covenant jurisdictional zone. So if you're aligned, right, in that, like we talk about Saul being aligned in the violence and our common enemy, right, against the house of David, well, that's a boundary enforcement piece. And this guy, he is very dangerous. Very dangerous. Some fun facts. He also acts as the underworld gate opener. He's this deity who controls the liminal space, right? The boundary, the fire boundary, the liminal space between life and death itself. So if you were being threatened with soul death, for example, this is the guy who's going to enforce that with his minions. And he keeps these gates, allowing the sun goddess, coincidentally, put a pin in that one, put a big old pin in the sun goddess gate, to pass through the realm of the dead each night. If you don't know what I'm talking about, rising like a phoenix, all the power and how go to the eye thing. Okay, go to the eye thing all the way back to Egypt. It's not just Egypt. We did this in the Meet Baal series. This whole underworld journey and then being reborn thing is not just Egypt. All roads lead to Egypt. I always say that. Everything's built on the infrastructure of Egypt. Okay, but here we see it too. So this guy is in the sun god or the sun goddess's procession and is opening these dangerous liminal gates between life and death and controlling that boundary of the underworld death cycle. Yeah, makes Paul's baptism of death look a little different now, doesn't it? Just saying. Another fun fact. Resheph fits directly into the Hadad divine court, okay? As a destructive underworld enforcer, he is a messenger of harm, and his functions parallel the punitive entities in Deuteronomy and our good old friend Psalm 78. This is one of the destroying angels that was cursed against the Ephraim bloodline in Psalm 78. Now you're seeing how this all begins to click into place. But wait, there's more. Wait, there's more. So the Hebrew Bible actually does preserve Resheph in this imagery in 3 places, always in the same role: fire, plague and arrows, and destructive force under divine command. And who's giving that divine command? Well, the Lord, of course. Which Lord? That would be Hadad. So he's in Hadad's court. Hadad is ruling the area of Aram, and he's got minions that he sends out. And this is one of Hadad's minions. And the plot thickens. So his name means flame or burning one or lightning bolt. He's associated with desert lightning storms, sudden flashes, again, his fiery arrows that are that quick, fast, blitzkrieg style sudden attack. Suddenly a light shone around. Well, there's the sudden. That's the arrows of Resheph. And he also has a blinding radiance. Doesn't this sound familiar? Yes, it does. He appears in Ugaritic texts as a flash of destructive light. So this is an entity that isn't just in the Hebrew Bible. It's shared across all of these cultures. All right, he is the god of arrows. And this is, like I said, that quick, sudden attack. Plagues, fever, divine attack, all arrows. He's literally called the Lord of the Arrow, the archer, and the one who strikes suddenly. Paul is struck suddenly and blinded. And that right there, that's Resheph's signature. That is his signature move throughout these texts. He causes blindness in epiphany encounters. This is the big one, guys. In multiple ancient Near East traditions, when this asshole appears, oh, watch out. The light overwhelms. The human collapses to the ground. The eyes fail. And the person is incapacitated. Like maybe needs to be led by the hand somewhere else. So this entire encounter, although in Hadad's zone, has Resheph written all over it. I read Acts 9. It's very, very difficult for me to read Acts 9 because I understand the ritual behind it and how perfectly it maps on the destroying angels sent out. That those, remember Psalm 70, the legion of destroying angels are sent out to curse Ephraim. We're going to get to that soon. It's the same entities. And we see this all across the ancient Near East, this same guy. So in Acts 9, we see a light, we see a collapse, we see blindness and disorientation. In this collapse, remember, it's that fall to ruin, that fall into sin, that fall of defeat, not like falling on your knees in prayer like David would do. And it's his calling card. Jesus's post-resurrection appearances don't do this. And they certainly never blind anyone. Resheph is specifically tied to desert regions around Damascus. His cult centers and epiphany zones include Aram Desert, the Syrian Desert, anywhere in the Transjordan region, Phoenicia, and conveniently enough, the wilderness regions of North Judea, where we would also find the priesthood of Jerusalem that consolidated their power there and moved the city of David into Jerusalem and made them one and the same. It's where Solomon merged the ark in the sacrifice. It's where the ritual political curse came out against the northern Ephraim. That whole spot of the north of Judea is, well, that's his territory too. That's where he pops up. And Paul is traveling right through this territory. And we also talked about, the tribe of Dan being right there on that road as well. So any type of desert light encounter in this specific region, we've talked about this before in this series, is going to be read by any ancient person as a desert deity has appeared. It's not the Jesus of the Galilee, regardless of what he says. And we'll see even that language is wonky. When he says, I am Jesus, it's not how Jesus talks. There's no qualifier. And that is a demonic calling card. Okay. They're liars. They're mimickers. These entities don't say, I'm Jesus, the son of David, man of Nazareth. That's how Jesus talks. I'm the son of man. I'm the son of David. I'm Jesus the Nazarene. There's always a qualifier to tell you which Jesus. The entity that Paul meets in the desert doesn't do that. He just says, I'm Jesus. That's not the right language for Jesus to say. He would give a qualifier and be very specific, because that's how the entities work and operate. And this would be common knowledge in the first century. It's not common knowledge today. So there's that piece. And as I said, he does appear in the Hebrew Bible, but translators hide him behind words like Lord, but he shows up in Deuteronomy, Habakkuk, Song of Songs, and of course, right there in Psalm 78. But English translations just, plague, pestilence, burning fever, flame. The editors didn't want a named deity in the text. But the Hebrew is clear. It's Resheph. Biblical writers knew exactly who this figure was and exactly what he did and wrote him into the text. And your translators took it out and made everything Lord. Or, hid it under this, the spirit of whatever language. Or sent plague. It's really awkward language that they've translated out. So why does all this matter for Acts 9? Well, because if you remove the assumption that the speaker is really Jesus, now our scene matches Resheph's epiphany pattern, geography, sensory overload effects, the ritual confrontation style, the blinding light, and the sudden attack. The Greek grammar, I am Jesus. This is a spirit impersonation, not Jesus of Nazareth self-identification, where you're going to have a qualifier. Jesus, son of David, right? Jesus, son of Joseph. Jesus, the Nazarene, the son of man. There's always that qualifier, because that's the way the language patterns worked. The entity cannot use that language pattern. So it's like, Jesus. It's like, imagine going, I'm Jesus. And I go, which one? Which one? Test the spirits, right? That didn't happen here. There was no testing of the spirit. There was no name qualifier. And that's exactly what entities do when they mimic. I got hugs and a matter from Jesus. How do you know? Because he said, I'm Jesus. Okay. Paul said, I'm not lying. How do you know? Because Paul said so. Same fucking game. This is why qualifiers were used in these types of texts. So that's a giveaway in itself. The way they claim Jesus identified himself. Throw that out the window. It didn't happen like that in that culture. That was so rich with these different types of epiphany stories. You had to have a qualifier because epiphanies were pretty freaking common. So Hadad's role as storm god made him central to fertility, seasonal cycles, and ritual drama. Texts from Ugarit and later summaries show him as the god of fertility directly, whose death and return explain the seasonal changes, and whose cult involved trance-like ritual behavior. So that's who's in charge up there. And his minion, one of his minions, would be Resheph. So which one of these deities actually met Paul on the road? Well, here's an easy little chart to distinguish them. Hadad, we've got storm, thunder, and lightning. Resheph, we've got plague, fire, burning arrows. Baal-Hadad comes with a flash of light. Resheph is blinding light, scorching radiance. Hadad is collapse, fear, and disorientation. Resheph is blindness, fear, and incapacitation. Hadad is in the Aram Damascus area, up by Lebanon, Phoenicia, Syria. Resheph is throughout the desert regions and in the wildernesses. The speech style. Hadad would be very territorial. Like, why are you opposing me? He's sort of the king of the region, if you will. He's the top guy in the region. So he's going to come at you in this oppositional way. Resheph's going to confront you. Why are you bothering me? Why are you chasing me? Why are you coming after me? Okay, that sort of thing. Why are you running after me? Why are you aligning with me? What is your intent? Do we have a shared enemy? Hadad appears with plague spirits, which would be Resheph, while Resheph appears with storm spirits. And we see some parallels in Ezekiel, Elijah, like Deuteronomy, Habakkuk, Song 8, and Psalms 78. But we're not going to look at those. We will in the future. We're going to just apply all this to Acts 9. We're in Damascus, which is Hadad's throne room, where he rules from, the cult center, right? Ground zero for Hadad. Talked about this before. So any ancient first century person hearing a light from heaven, quote unquote, on the road to Damascus would definitely think desert epiphany. That's Hadad's turf. Resheph is heavily attested in the Syrian desert corridor as well. So our geography alone shows Hadad is the dominant leader and Resheph is a possible companion or co-manifestation. The sensory effects, the blindness, that's Resheph for sure. This is the big one. Baal-Hadad overwhelms, terrifies, and knocks you on your ass. But the epiphanies from Hadad don't blind you. Resheph is the one that blinds you. Blinding, scorching, incapacitating, and sudden. So Paul's experience was a sudden flash, a collapse, blind for 3 days. That's Resheph's calling card, not Hadad. So the sensory effects point to Resheph. Speech pattern. This is also Resheph. The ruling storm god, which would be Hadad, is going to be a territorial, authoritative, and thunderous. Why are you coming against me? How dare you? Where your minions, like Resheph, is going to be accusatory, confrontational, challenging, or why are you pursuing me? Okay, it's tricky demony, whereas Hadad is more authoritative, if you will. And the verb that we talked about, this pursue and chase, not why are you persecuting? It's chasing me, pursuing me, aligning with me, if you will. This fits Resheph's domain. Hunting, chasing, striking, and quick, those quick fiery arrows. It doesn't fit Baal-Hadad's typical authoritative dominion type speech. So the voice itself sounds more like Resheph. And that's what a first century person would think. Oh, we know who that is. The light itself, though, that's a little mixed. The description that we see in the text is a light from heaven shone around him. Well, this is a little ambiguous because Hadad does a flash, Resheph is blinding, and suddenness and in the desert, well, that's both. So it can feel sort of like this hybrid duo, this dynamic duo working together in this epiphany story. And that's not unusual. In ancient Near East, Hadad and Resheph often appear together, okay? Baal brings the storm, Resheph brings the burning plague. Together, they manifest as this overwhelming desert light. So honestly, it could be both. The most likely scenario is the primary attacking entity. That's Resheph. Our secondary influence, or our authoritative influence, sending the minion Resheph out, that would be Hadad. So think of Hadad as saying, Resheph, go check that guy out. Resheph runs out and does the bidding. Okay, so this is a Resheph dominant epiphany occurring in Hadad's territory, using Hadad's storm god theatrics, because that's his thing. So this is a Resheph entity manifesting through Hadad's atmospheric domain, right? This is his boundary zone, which is very, very common in the Semitic text. So as we were reading, we said that we talk a little more about this light from heaven phrase. And this doesn't automatically mean it's a benevolent sign. It's ritual epiphany. I showed you at the beginning, all of these things there's always a light, okay? It can signal storm gods, desert encounter, deceptive apparition, hostile confrontation. It could be a test. It could be a challenge. It's not just every time I see a light, it's God. Okay, that's ridiculous. In Aramaic, Hellenistic, and Ugaritic, a light from heaven can mean it's a being, an entity, asserting jurisdiction. I always say it's a jurisdictional covenant warfare. Jurisdiction, regions. It's not a blessing. It's not a salvation. It's marking territorial dominance. Okay? Think of dogs. Instead of running around peeing on things, they're lighting shit up with fires. Okay? They're lighting things up around their domain. It's their boundary. The bubble of light, if you will. Looking at you, New Agers. And Damascus happens to be Hadad's turf. This is just such a textbook epiphany for Hadad. It's ridiculous. So to me, the first time I read this, and I'm embarrassed to say, the first time I read this was like, I don't know, 7 years ago. It was because I was clueless, right? I had no idea. I'd had all these experiences, but I didn't have the background knowledge and the schema to put it together yet. We had just gone through the stopping of these attacks for decades and started the growlers casting out and the healing stuff. And we're like, what the hell's going on? So we began the Bible study group. And when we first began 7 or 8 years ago, a very, very, very good friend of mine. Hi, I love you. Oh my gosh, I'm going to tell the story. We were talking on the phone, and it was close to Easter time. And she said, good Christian girl. We're good Christian girls over here. She said, I'm going to read Acts for Easter. And I said, oh, okay. Well, I'll read that too. And then we'll compare notes. And I get this, no. Okay. We get saying, no, don't you read that. And the answer I got was, your Greek is nowhere near ready for Paul. Well, me being me, I didn't listen. And I went ahead and I read Acts and everything was great. And I get to Acts 9:1. You guys, I'm going to tell you, when I read Acts 9, paragraph 1, and this is one of the reasons it's kind of hard for me to get through these. I fumble a lot in the Mayhem series too, because we talk about this also. We haven't dropped that series yet. That's coming one day. But this feeling of overwhelming darkness, I made some social media posts about it, and to my friends, and also in the study group, our private study group, before we made these videos public. So I made a lot of posts, and we talked about this several times, maybe a dozen times over the course of weeks. I kept saying, there is something with this Paul guy, man. I am vexed. That was the word I used. Vexed. This is vexing me, and I can't shake it. This overwhelming blanket of darkness when I read Acts 9 was incredible. And it made me sick to my stomach. It made me sick. And it wouldn't go away. It nagged me. It bothered me. It vexed me. And so that's when we stopped and said, okay, we're going to pay attention to this, and we're going to go ahead and crawl up Paul's ass. And that's where we caught him misquoting King David, because we started in David, right? We're grounded in David first. So we know David. And when we caught Paul in Romans misquoting David, not once, not twice, but like 8 fucking times, for the no one is righteous, not even one thing. That's where it all started to unravel. And it's thanks to this first paragraph that we're breaking down now. So it had a very physical effect and a cognitive effect on me when I read this. And it's just a yucky thing for me. So I don't like talking about this, okay? So all of this ritual language, and of course the experiences that I've had for decades, leads right into this paragraph. And that's why when I read Acts 9 for the first time, this whole scene felt to me like a ritual ambush and a claim of authority that was not Davidic. And it repulsed me. So the light blinds Paul. And in biblical tradition, well, God's light isn't blinding, it's enlightening. The deceptive light overwhelms and disables. Blinding is a sign of dominion, disorientation, and incapacitation, not revelation. And we've talked about back in the Saul series, somewhere it's in there. I know we talked about the different times that God blinded, and it was always an enemy. So if God was actually the one blinding Saul, that's a blinding your enemy maneuver. It's not to give revelation, okay? But we don't even think that's what was happening here. We don't think this has anything to do with Jesus's father or Jesus the King himself, the man of Galilee, son of David. We're not interpreting it as God's blinding his enemies even. We're going further. Because this is not the calling card of the God of the house of David. It just isn't. Don't do revelation this way. Now, when he falls to the ground in ruin or in sin that we've read, right? Ruinous fall, collapse. This isn't the worship, I'm going to get down on my knees and pray. It's a forced throwdown. It's being seized onto the ground. Okay, think of an arrest, right? You're getting tackled onto the ground here. And everything about that matches the Hadad epiphanies and the Resheph way of operating with the fiery attack. This is a Hellenistic demonic encounter. It does not match anything, even remotely close, to Jesus, son of David's post-resurrection appearances in the Gospels. He doesn't throw people to the ground when he appeared to them. So this is our persecuting verb a little more closely. And these are just lexical facts, you guys. Okay? Every major lexicon agrees that the primary meaning of this verb is to run after, to pursue, to chase, to run swiftly in order to catch something, to follow, following after someone. Think of a groupie. The secondary or derived meaning is to persecute, to harass or trouble. That is nowhere near the base meaning. This is a contextual extension put in there to paper over this. So why do they choose persecute instead of run after or follow? Because the translators are assuming, this is one of those places where the translators make a choice based on their own bias and doctrine. They're assuming that Paul's attacking the Jesus movement, so it must mean persecute. That's theological backfill. It's not linguistic. The Greek itself does not force this persecute meaning. As a matter of fact, it speaks against it. It simply says, why are you pursuing after me? Why are you chasing me? Why are you following me? And if the speaker is not Jesus of Nazareth, but an imposter identity, this becomes so important in ritual language, in ritual pattern. Because in this epiphany language, why are you pursuing me? Well, in our Greco-Roman epiphany literature, a divine or semi-divine being is confronting the humans as part of this genre. Is why are you following me? Why are you hunting me? Why are you chasing me? What do you want from me, human? That's the pattern in these epiphany genre. It's ritual confrontation language, not a moral accusation. Okay? Remember, these beings think that they are elevated to humans. It's like, what are you doing with me, human? Why are you chasing after me? It's that sort of connotation in these epiphany stories. And this is a linguistic problem that translators just don't want to deal with. If the speaker is Jesus, then why are you pursuing me? Why are you coming after? Like, why are you running after me? Makes no sense. Paul was not trying to follow after Jesus. He wasn't chasing Jesus to find Jesus. And Jesus is already ascended, by the way. But if the speaker's this desert apparition, a spirit, a deceiving entity, if this is a being that Paul has been knowingly or unknowingly tracking through his ritual alignment, then the literal meaning, guys, it fits like a glove. This is where Jesus identifies himself, right? Jesus, I am Jesus. This is the light called itself Jesus. But there's no title. It doesn't say I'm Jesus the Messiah. I'm the Son of Man. I'm the Son of David. I'm the Nazarene. And this very simple, no label, no title, no marker, no relational piece. That's the calling card of how spirits identify themselves when they're building ambiguity and deception. And this is a classic epiphany text maneuver by these spirits. What's your name? No, what's your real name? No, give me your real name. That whole thing comes from this mythos, right? This casting out demons. You have to ask for its name. No, you don't. No, you don't. And if you did, they're probably not telling you the truth anyway. This whole ask for its name thing is stupid. That's a solid, I'm not going to say it's stupid. Stop, back up. Gosh, I get so angry. It is Solomonic. That's what we'll say. This invoking names, asking names, piece of all of that is Solomonic ritual. I always say, go listen to my growler tapes. I'm not asking anybody's name, okay? I sometimes argue because I get all pissed. Oz doesn't argue, he just throws their asses. There's no name. Okay, that's Solomonic magical occult tradition. So this whole identifying moniker is one of their ways of deception. Does that make sense? So you don't waste your time asking for their name. And the companions hear the voice, but see nothing. Classic epiphany genre again. Paul's blinded by the light, but Jesus never blinds anyone. Resheph does. So the verb is to pursue, not persecute. Pursue, like, a dude chasing after the chick at the bar, like, wait a minute, you mean I have a chance? That, okay. It makes no sense if Jesus is the one speaking. Paul wasn't pursuing to find Jesus. Now, in the ancient world, this idea of spirit does not mean emotion. Modern people hear the spirit of anger and think, oh, he was emotionally angry. The spirit of fear, oh, he felt afraid. Do not be afraid, people. Breathing threats, oh, he was so emotional, he's stomping around like Rumpelstiltskin. That's not what this means. The Bible wasn't written in the language of modern English Christians, worldview in the West. It just isn't. In the ancient Near East, spirit means an external force, an animating presence, a breath being that enters a person. It is a supernatural agent. Okay? It's not your internal, emotional, psychological makeup. It's an external influence. The breath and the spirit are the same word in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. So this breathing threats and murder is not a mood. It's a diagnosis. It's not saying Paul was in a bad emotional state. It's saying Paul was inhaling a violent, animating force. It's ritual. He's under influence. He's carrying a spirit, an attachment, if you will, by how we think of it today. This would be an attachment. He's animated by a hostile breath or a hostile spirit. He's acting as an agent of that spirit, which is why the desert entity is confronting him. Hollywood has done such a number on this idea of possession. Think of attachment, not possession, okay? These are attaching. It's coming into you through the very breath. In this ritual logic, this occult logic, breath is allegiance. It's the one you serve, the one you pursue, the one you act for, the one you're aligning with. So when the entity says, why are you pursuing me? It's speaking to this breath bond that he just took in, not his emotions. Think of it as Saul breathes in this spirit, okay? And then the entity, Hadad's entity, comes running out and says, hey, why are you aligned with us? Think of it like that. Why are you aligning with us? Why are you making this bond with us through this animating spirit? He's carrying the breath of a plague, storm, violent, animating force. But modern translators are softening spirit into emotion. They do not want to deal with the ritual encoded occult possession adjacent language here that is so common in the epiphany genres. I'm sorry, but it's the uncomfortable truth. If you translate this text, Paul's breathing in a hostile spirit, confronts him in the desert, uses ritual confrontation language. It matches exactly ancient Near East epiphany patterns. The Greek is suspiciously flat by those deceptive enemies. There's no title with the I am Jesus thing. And the blindness matches Resheph, who works for Hadad. not Jesus, son of David. Translators don't want to deal with it. So he was angry. He was zealous. He was persecuting. That's not what the Greek says. So how the priestly worldview, let's go a little deeper, shaped Paul's understanding of quote unquote angels. Okay. This whole Paul is a Roman agent thing, I understand why people are getting to that conclusion. This is usually coming from people who have audited Rome and failed miserably to audit Babylon and the Pharisees and the temple religion coming out of post-Babylon. They didn't do the work on that side. They didn't do their homework. So everything in their worldview is against Rome. So Rome are the bad guys. The temple elites are the good guys. That's the original faith. And so Paul has to be working for the bad guys. And a lot of the scholarship is biased because it's Western scholars or it's temple-aligned scholars of that religion. Does that make sense? So there's this worldview that is assuming the Babylonian Persian setup in the Second Temple period is representing the original Hebrew God. It's not. They haven't audited that part. There's no one from the Southern Kingdom or the Northern Kingdom anywhere near that frickin' place. By the time we went through, Maccabees, Hasmoneans, Herods. The Herods are in frickin' charge, for heaven's sakes. And I'm sorry, the Herods may be appointed by Rome, but they're not Roman. They're Edomites. They're Caleb. They're the Lion of Judah. That's who they are. So they're getting confused in this, debate over Paul being Roman or Paul being Pharisaical. And it's a right-left paradigm. It's the same thing you see in U.S. politics. Oh, the Democrats are wrong. No, the Republicans are wrong. No, the Democrats. You're both wrong. Okay, they're both wrong. They're on the same. It's the same side. There's no difference. Okay, this is empire religion. It doesn't matter. Let it go. And they're not seeing how this priestly religion of the time shaped Paul's understanding of angels. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Because what Paul inherited from this post-exile temple priesthood, angels were not cute messengers, symbolic metaphors, and abstract forces. They were enforcement agents of a jurisdictional covenant authority. Okay? This is your Exodus destroyer that we found. These are your destroying angels in Psalm 78 that was written in. The watchers in Daniel. We've got punitive spirits in Jubilees, which, by the way, priestly literature. And they're this sort of jurisdictional police in the priesthood's imagination. So in Paul's worldview, angels are the beings who gave, police, and enforce the law. This is why this is a sect of these Pharisees that believe this worldview, who are temple aligned to that religion of the time. Okay, the law was given by angels. The law is mediated through angels. A messenger of Satan tormented me. We wrestle against principalities and powers. That line that everyone loves to pull out when they're talking about spiritual warfare, but they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. This wrestle against principalities and powers, coming up in Luke in just a few more chapters, I think 9 through 11, we get very deep into Solomonic magic, okay? In the structure of that. This line, wrestling against principalities and powers, that's not Paul's genius. That's Solomonic worldview that he's spewing, okay? He's not teaching you how to do spiritual warfare. He's on the other side. He's on the Solomonic side. That's a Solomonic quote from a Solomonic temple worldview. He's not inventing this, okay? He's repeating this legal temple religion's worldview that he was trained in. So how this enforcement pattern ties in to the whole Ephraim-Judah conflict, because we know it does, because these entities are the same ones in Psalm 78 that we broke down. Go see that series, Babylonian Fuckery Psalm. So inside this framework, okay, which is consistent with the realities of the political landscape of the post-exile period, our conflict is now, Ephraim is the rightful heir to the Abrahamic covenant in Genesis 48. Judah is a Babylon-backed proxy that the priesthood elevated and stole the identity and is acting in place of. Okay, that's the landscape. So Paul is loyal to the second one, to the priesthood, running this narrative against Ephraim because of the inheritance. Didn't go to Judah ever. And we know that Psalm 78 is our propaganda text, right? Cursing Ephraim, elevating Judah, rewrites David as Judah lineage rather than resident, wrongly attaches the city of Zion to Jerusalem. Those are not the same. Legitimizes this temple cartel priesthood and weaponizes these destroying angels, of which Resheph is a member of, against Ephraim. The destroyers in Psalm 78 are not random. They're the ritual enforcers of the anti-Ephraim covenant Davidic system. And Paul is aligned with that system because he's loyal to the temple system. We talked about this in Luke last time, or the time before, I don't know, where he made those two categories, that binary of Jew versus Gentile. That's a false binary. Why did he create it? Because he's loyal to the temple system. And he's in the Judah-centric temple stealing of the covenant from Genesis 48. He's not aligned with the Davidic Ephraim leadership of the tent of David. So looking at Saul, he's a Benjamite, which is Rachel's bloodline, but he's loyal to the Judah temple system. Rachel's son's here. Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin. Joseph's son, right? Joseph. This is line of Joseph. But he's tethered. And their territory was in the south. And they're tethered to the Judah temple system. He's enforcing the anti-Ephraim priestly ideology. He's breathing in the same enforcer breath that is set up in the temple. He's a human extension or a human agent of the Psalm 78 destroyers. So in this worldview, when we pull all these things together over the past, I don't know, dozen videos that we've done, Saul is performing the enforcement role that the priestly destroyers are performing against Ephraim. He's aligned. He's not just a legal agent. He's a ritual agent of the anti-Ephrathite system of David, of the house of David. That's what's happening.
You know, Keith, there's in England kind of an underground top 10 about people that are expected to die soon.
Am I on the list?
And yet you're taking the #1 position in that.
Great,
How
okay,
about
I'll
that?
let you know.
But how about that?
It's a bit morbid, and I don't think you should
I've
answer
had
that.
rumours like that for years,
Do you
don't
think it's rubbish?
I?
Do you think
Well,
it's rubbish?
I would never get out
Well,
there
you
and
never
say
know when your
it's
number's
rubbish,
up.
You know, I might walk out of here and get run over.
Blue Reed is on the second place. He's very proud of
I
it.
think you can beat me, actually.
And if you haven't seen the past dozen or so videos, you are not going to understand those connections. So go back. Okay. So I would say, write shit down, go back. This is why the desert confrontation fits this whole pattern. He's carrying the breath of the ritual enforcement laid out in earlier text. He's entering this liminal zone, this gateway. He encounters a being that speaks in enforcement language, and it mirrors the Exodus Psalm 78 destroyer angel pattern. He's not just enforcing the law. He's continuing the priestly ritual of suppressing Ephraim. Wait a minute. Are you saying that the first century temple system was set up with this ritual structure? You're telling me that Babylon and Persia were engaged in ritual occult while running the entire priesthood system in the first century that Jesus fought against? Yes. That's exactly what I'm telling you. So when I say things like these Hebrew roots guys out there, or these anti-Paul guys who are auditing Rome, and rightfully so, okay? Rome's not the good guy. When I say they're not auditing Babylon, that's what I'm talking about. That, put a pin in that, because I don't just make random claims without backing it up with 57,000 videos for you. So we're getting there, okay? So where these threads fuse, okay? The priesthood taught that angels gave the law. And these angels are the same category as the destroyers. In that second voice we found in Exodus and other places, by the way, in Psalm 78. But specifically, we're talking about there. We found them other places. But those two I want to focus you on from that last series of the Babylonian Psalm that we did, Psalm 78. We identified all that. And Paul has internalized this worldview and is loyal and in covenant with this worldview. Paul is in jurisdictional covenant with this priesthood worldview. So when he's enforcing the law, he believes he's acting in alignment with the same angelic enforcers. This is part of his covenant of the priesthood. And in that worldview, in that religion, angels are the bureaucracy behind the law. Angels enforce the boundaries. Angels are the agents who punish violators. Agents are the destroyers who act when Israel rebels against them. So Paul's entire schema of angels comes from the same priestly religion and enforcement system. Remember, Pharisees are our police, right? That produced and wrote the curse in Psalm 78. That's who he is. That's the system he's aligned with. That system does work with Rome, in conjunction with Rome. Okay? But what that system and religion is showing to the people is not what's happening behind the scenes. And if you can't imagine that, you've never taken a look at the Vatican. Just saying. Paul is thinking like a temple-trained Pharisee, not in a magical mystic, if you will. Although the temple priesthood engaged in Solomonic demonology, which we're going to learn in Luke in coming up series. As our series progresses into Luke, I think it's 9 through 11, I think is where we dig deep into there. So Psalm 78, destroying angels, these are the priestly enforcement agents of the ritual curse. It's a propaganda piece from the post-Babylon priesthood. We've learned that. It weaponizes these angels, binding Ephraim, cursing Ephraim, attacking Ephraim, and elevating Judah. It legitimizes this post-Babylon Persia elite legal cartel religion that they force people to convert to. These destroyers are the ritual enforcers of jurisdiction and covenant of that entire religion. So the destroying angels, they're a narrative embodiment of the priesthood enforcement power. We see this in the Exodus second voice, same category. The second voice is the threatening, punishing, enforcement voice. This is the priestly insert. It's the prototype for those Psalm 78 destroying angels. Paul's trained inside this same enforcement ideology. Pharisee, our Pharisees, remember, are like the Saudi religious police. They're policing. They're trained under the legal system. They're loyal to the post-exile political priesthood, corrupt political priesthood from Babylon, Persia, working with Rome via the Herods, who are Esau. They're shaped by the same propaganda that produced the curse in Psalm 78 to begin with. They didn't just do the curse one and done. Okay, this is an ongoing thing. Remember, it's a mouth skill. It's a teaching. It's a worldview. It's part of what they do. We talked about that word maskell. It's a handed down tradition of enforcement. And here's how. Constantly referring to angels giving the law or the priestly enforcers. That's Paul. So when he's acting violently for the law, he's not talking about Moses and the Ten Commandments. He's not just doing legal work. He's performing the enforcement ritual role. He's acting as a human extension of the same logic that Psalm 78 ritually began. So Acts 9 shows Paul in the same ritual pattern as the destroyers. It's not mystical. It's ritual narrative. We're breathing in the violent enforcement. We're pursuing covenant violators. We're acting as a temple agent. We're enforcing the anti-Ephrathite system, which is the house of David. We're carrying out the same pattern as the Psalm 78 destroyers. So our Ugaritic text from late Bronze Age Syria give us some of the clearest evidence of this makeup. Resheph appears as the plague spirit who operates under Baal's authority. This ritual text invokes Baal and his burning ones, and Resheph is listed explicitly as one of the messenger spirits who carry out his destructive commands. That we also see him in Egyptian texts. Resheph is the servant of Baal. When the Egyptians adopted Resheph into their pantheon in the New Kingdom, they explicitly called him Resheph of the army of Baal. Resheph, the one who goes out at Baal's command. These are a New Kingdom stele, Egyptian magical papyri, and even temple inscriptions at Memphis and Thebes. But that's not all. We've also got the Phoenicians. Thanks for showing up. Resheph is Baal's agent. In the Phoenician votive inscriptions, Resheph is invoked right alongside in a subordinate dispatched role. Common quotes are like Resheph of the arrow, the one Baal sends out to strike, Resheph who goes forth, and Resheph the smiter. And even, yes, in the Hebrew Bible, Resheph is sent as a destructive force. So across all of these different places, he's constantly portrayed as all of these attributes and the one who goes out to strike, subordinate to the storm god deity. This is why the scholars themselves say he is the one that Baal sends out. This is not a metaphor. This is the actual cosmology. So Hadad's our high-tier storm deity. He's not going to do his own dirty work. He commands armies of spirits, just like every other entity who is in that major position of jurisdiction. He's our fire, plague, arrow spirit, the destroyer. Okay? He's the hitman, sent out to strike, blind, burn, and afflict. So you have to think of this as a job description category. He's got the same functional category. His function, his job is the destroyer in Exodus, the slaughtering angels in Ezekiel, the night terrors in Psalm 91, the seven spirits in ancient Near East cosmology, the evil spirit from the quote-unquote Lord in Samuel. But he's not identical to them. He's a member of that class, that job category. Now, what are these seven spirits? Well, that's a category of divine agents. Every major deity, okay, ruling over their regions and their jurisdiction, always had seven messengers, seven destroyers, seven winds, seven flames, seven eyes, seven watchers, seven. Oh boy, we've got to go back to that Saul video on the seven and update it now that you've got some more information. Okay. Seven is complete list, totality, and full coverage. Yep. Night attack spirits, sleep spirits. These include Lilith-type beings, desert spirits, dream attacks, terror by night that we see in Psalm 91. He's also part of the slaughtering spirits. These guys carried swords around and were well armed. Okay. They have tons of armor and they're dispatched, executing covenant boundaries and judgment in jurisdictional, operating in teams and always acting under a higher deity's command. And this is exactly how Resheph functions under Hadad. He's one of the slaughtering spirits, or the sent ones, to torture the enemies, who, in this case, would be Ephraim and those in Ephraim Covenant. So not necessarily the same being, meaning he's not one of the seven spirits, he's not one of the slaughtering, not one of the, he's just in the same category. It's a job description, same category. This is what they all do. They're all these dispatched agents and destructive night strikers, enforcers. They are your hitmen. In Egypt, we've got the slaughterers, because he's breathing threats and slaughter. Well, slaughterers, we actually have these liminal plague-bearing, slaughtering spirits. They're called, quite literally, the slaughterers. They're liminal beings. They threaten the living and the dead, okay? And they're in that space between life and death. They're called knife bearers, plague bringers, and slaughterers. They operate in groups. They're dangerous at night. They take you to the threshold of that liminal space. And this is the same functional category as Resheph, the Mesopotamian seven, and the Hebrew destroying angels. So all of these cultures have the same class of beings. Our Resheph is just our West Semitic group of slaughterers. We've also got our seven evil spirits. This is Mesopotamian slaughtering storm plague agents. And they are evil gods, are they? They are mighty destroyers, hunting in the heavens. They deal out death, and no door can shut them out. I beg to differ. I beg to differ. So how they all connect. Egyptian, they're plagues, plagues, plagues. We see that all across. Plague is also not just illness, it's death. Okay? Plagues are death. So they're dealing with death and threats of death. In Egyptian, they're night bearers, fire, lightning, fever, lightning storms. They always serve a major deity. Specifically, the Resheph is the agent of Hadad. They're liminal entities, which is why they're manifesting oftentimes in deserts, because we talked about that liminal crossing over zone. And they enter into houses, crossing the threshold or the doorway of your home, your room, your private space to enforce jurisdiction and drag across that liminal gateway of life and death. Are they dangerous to humans? Yes, yes, and yes. So the question I was left with, did Paul breathe in this violent spirit because he was open, or because he was participating in a specific occult ritual and he invited it in? Well, the ancient world only had two explanations for breathing in a hostile spirit. It was unintentional, meaning you're an open channel, they've got legal rights somehow. And the second one is a ritual alignment. It's an invocation. But these invocations were done through behavior, not ceremony. And this is another big one to get this Hollywood shit out of your head. So you don't have to draw a pentagram on the floor and have candles and chanting like in modern spell work, okay? It's in the ancient times, this was behavioral. So let's break this down a little more. If Paul was just a vulnerable channel, meaning it was sort of unintentional, they have this idea that the breath or the spirit, the floating spirit, they have nowhere to land. We'll talk about that, put a pin in that. The spirits have nowhere to land. Okay, that's Solomonic. We'll talk about that coming up in Luke and whenever we get there. So it needs to find a host. The breath needs to find a host. So the person gets an attachment or becomes a vessel. I don't want you to think of Hollywood possession. I want you to think of attachment. When they're emotionally destabilized, inflamed, ideologically out of covenant, of Davidic covenant, in my worldview, isolated, operating outside of the Davidic covenant protection. Anything that puts you out of covenant and at risk, or within their domain or within that jurisdiction, they've now got legal jurisdiction and they can attach. because they need that host. Does that make sense? But he was a perfect open channel for a violent breath spirit. And in this idea of attachment is how they, in their worldview, they explain things. Just like, sudden rage. This is the devil made me do it, when they're really compulsive and obsessive. Like I said, it's an attachment thing because out of covenant behavior aligned. Does that make sense? And this fits Paul's behavior with his compulsive travel, his obsessive pursuit, his unnatural forces that we'll see he works with later on. And this part is the one that modern thinkers miss because of Hollywood. In the ancient world, you didn't need all the altars and spell books and candles to invoke a spirit. What you had to do was align and be in their jurisdiction. That's what you had to do. You had to be unprotected within their jurisdiction and behaving in a way either outwardly destructive or self-destructive. So you can invoke them by acting in its nature, breathing in its breath, participating in its domain, aligning with its agenda, which could include violence, entering its territorial jurisdictional space unprotected. It's called ritual imitation. Behave like a storm spirit agent, you become the storm spirit's agent, okay? We talked about this way back in the book, Natural Law, go there. All of that stuff, that frequency stuff, that alignment stuff, the cause and effect we talked about, all that way back in the day is right here. This is ritual. They're using that in modern times today. And patterns in the ancient Near East are rituals, which is why behavior is so important and protection is so important. So, James works. There it is again. Behavior matters. Alignment matters. Your thoughts, your heart, your actions all matter. So which one was Paul? Well, I say he was both. He was vulnerable and he was aligned. He was an open channel and he was doing the ritual behavioralized. They're completely aligned. And this combination is exactly what ancient people believed attracts the spirit. Looking for a host. It's not Jesus. Jesus does not operate under ritual mechanics. And he certainly didn't identify himself with a title, which is how Jesus works. So the next layer, it's like peeling an onion, guys. The next layer is understanding. And I sort of jumped over this, but this is the big one, guys. This is the big one. When you realize that Paul's worldview, okay, is the Solomonic temple worldview, not the Mosaic worldview. And I want to point out the word Solomonic temple because everyone loves to talk about the second temple period. The second temple period adopted the practices laid out in the first temple period. And who is that? Solomon, that little freaking bastard. Don't tell me about the wisdom of Solomon. The heirs Ephrathite line does not go through Solomon. It goes through Nathan. Jesus dismantles. Well, okay, I get so pissed. You guys, Solomon, that fucking bastard. All right. What we're seeing in Luke right now, okay, over the last several videos, like 10, I don't know, is Jesus systematically dismantling the priesthood of the second temple period, right? What you haven't seen yet, that I keep referring to, coming up in Luke, is where he begins to dismantle the first temple system of Solomonic demonology. We haven't gotten there yet. We haven't gotten to the king dismantling the Solomonic temple, but it's there. And I want to remind you, in Luke series, we just saw in the bread, right? The harvest, the bread, the David thing, Luke 6, first paragraph, right? How David did not have the covenant ark and the sacrifice together. That is not a footnote in the text. It's a hinge point. Covenant and sacrifice don't go together in the Davidic Covenant worldview. They're separate. The one who put them together was Solomon. So we're talking about two different foundational worldviews. Okay. The assumption that everyone is operating under is that Jesus was aligned to the first century religion and temple loyal. He was just a good Jew, right? And that then the assumption is that that was based on the Solomon temple, which somehow David was aligned to. That's not the story. Not only was Jesus opposed to that first century religion in the second temple period, and we'll see the Solomonic one when he dismantles that coming up in Luke, but we also have to understand David wasn't aligned with the temple system either. So what I'm telling you, what I'm saying, my premise, we have two, at least, different religions getting fused, but they're not the same. I don't care how many lords they take out of the text or how many Yahwehs they put into the text. The worldview is that that religion stemmed from Solomon. David never endorsed Solomon's temple. They need you to just put a pin in that, guys, because that one goes deep. And we've just started to barely scratch the surface. So Paul's worldview is the Solomonic temple worldview, not the Mosaic worldview. Paul's not operating out of Sinai logic or Moses logic. Maybe Moses said so logic, but not Moses. You know the difference. He's operating out of the Solomonic temple system, and those are two different things. And once you see Psalm 78 as a Solomonic curse text, we'll get there when we get to Solomon. We're getting there in Luke. I promise we'll get there. And you see the destroyers as temple enforcement agents, you're seeing Paul act as the human extension of the system he's loyal to. Acts 9 is a confrontation and a merger, if you will, with these entities within the same system. Paul's theology that he teaches is shaped by this same angelic, bureaucratic, curse text logic that is the baseline of the entire fraudulent Second Temple, run by cartels of people like the Herods, right? All appointed, their political appointments from Babylon, Persia, and Rome. They're not the sons of, they're not the Davidic heirs, and they're not the sons of Jacob who are running this show in the Second Temple period. Once you get to see that, the whole narrative shifts, and it stops being Paul met Jesus. It's Paul met the enforcement logic he was carrying that the entire system was built on. That's what we're uncovering. Slowly and carefully. And I'll see you next time.
Energy. 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 You cannot fuck with this. Energy. You cannot fuck with this energy. All those in the session, all of those who are listening, don't miss the message, judging me. You cannot fuck with this energy.